Hello everyone and welcome back to another Mirror Dungeon solo video. Today we'll be using Gia Ishmael, who I'm just going to go right out of the gate and say she's a pretty mediocre identity who has numerous problems that make her kit incredibly awkward and clumsy to actually play with. Before I start digging into her though, I will start by saying a few things as to what she's good at, which just so happens to be fighting multiple weak enemies. In fact, it seems to me like she was specifically designed with this intention in mind, as she gets substantially stronger when she's attacking a weaker enemy than her, and half of her buffs only apply when she kills someone, which isn't a very useful conditional when you're only fighting a single enemy. She also has semi-reliable attack weight skills, which further enforces this idea that she should be attacking multiple people at once. And that is pretty much everything about her that I can say is purely good, so let's move on to the things I take issue with instead. First is her Rupture Infliction, because it's technically still a good thing. I say that because if you ignore her passive, she's entirely count negative. However, with her passive, she does become count neutral, which does allow her to effectively be played in a Rupture team. The problem with it comes from that passive, as the only way it guarantees she's count neutral is if she wins a clash against an enemy with a lower offense level than her, further cementing the fact that she's supposed to be used in fights with weak enemies. As in most content, you will be facing enemies who are equal level to you. That means that they will likely have a similar offense level, and thus whether or not she's actually count neutral is basically a coin flip. She can only gain extra offense level herself by either killing with her skill 2 or critting with her skill 1, but as her skill 1 only gives a single offense level, she does not have any reliable way to guarantee she has enough offense level without outside influence. She does, however, have one ego that is capable of buffing her offense level. Wingbeat's Corrosion gives offense level if she's at max health, so she does have a way to manipulate it. However, using an overclocked ego for something like that I would not consider to be particularly worth it. Her Poise generation, on the other hand, is arguably even worse. She is completely incapable of maintaining a Poise stack if she is not either killing enemies or being buffed by other units. She has enough to be able to get some value out of it, but once she starts critting consistently, the stack will immediately fall off, forcing her to constantly keep rebuilding it from scratch. Considering the fact that she's also a retreat identity, one would think that losing Poise quickly doesn't matter too much because she would lose it anyway once she retreats, so why does it matter? However, that just brings me to perhaps the most atrocious offender when it comes to her flaws: her support passive. This is the single worst support passive I've ever seen in the entire history of this game. It is so clunky and awkward to use that it is practically useless. Like, seriously, they completely overdid it with the conditionals to the point where it is easier to let the identity die than to try and use this support passive efficiently. It has a grand total of 4 different conditionals you need to activate in order to trigger the retreat. First, it needs a 4 gluttony resonance, so automatically it becomes utterly useless if you don't have enough gluttony. Second, the retreating identity needs to be at both 50% health and use a defense skill on the turn you trigger it. And by the turn you trigger it, I don't mean the end of the turn, I mean the start of it. If you want to try and activate it on purpose, you need to willingly let a character get staggered in order to drop their health low enough, wait an entire full turn for the stagger to run its course, and then waste a third final turn using a useless defense skill. The only exception to this is characters who have some way to reduce their own health, like in the case of Honglu's Tears of the Tarnished ego. However, if a character is purposefully reducing their own health, they're likely doing it for a better reason than to simply let Ishmael swap in. In the case of the Tears of the Tarnished, it's to use the powerful attack that happens when Honglu dies, something that can't happen if he retreats. With all of the conditionals, it completely disables the ability to use Ishmael's passive defensively as a way to negate staggers, or offensively as a way to trigger Ishmael's swap-in attack. By forcing you to start the turn below 50% HP to trigger it, you have to eat at least one stagger no matter what, which de-incentivizes you from actively using it and makes it much more of a reactive thing instead. It turns it from something that could have been used as a way to constantly cycle through different identities on the field at any given time, to only being usable under very specific scenarios that you will never be in unless you get incredibly unlucky. It takes away player agency by making it effectively impossible to manipulate when you want to trigger it without completely wasting multiple turns of doing absolutely nothing. This isn't a support passive you can choose when to activate. It is one that you can only use when the opportunity presents itself, and that opportunity is when you get horrendously unlucky and lose a clash that you probably should have won. With all of that said though, none of it really matters because her entire passive revolves around her retreat mechanic, and something you need to ask yourself whenever you use a character with a retreat is, why would I want to retreat them in the first place? For the other 3 retreat characters, their answer is quite simple. 2 of them do it because they don't want to die, and the other does it because he literally can't do anything else otherwise. For Ishmael though, her answer is to use a special skill 1 with extra attack weight. It doesn't even have any damage modifiers tied to it or anything, it's literally just a basic skill 1 that hits a lot of people. Why would you want to retreat Ishmael, or any identity for that matter, just so you could use that? If you ever want Ishmael to use her launcher attack, you could just put her as a backup and run one of the Deviat. Otherwise, her retreat is only really useful as a get out of jail free card when, like I said previously, you lose an unlucky clash. So in summary, she's a mediocre rupture identity with subpar poise generation, lots of attack weight so she's good against multiple enemies, and she has a completely pointless retreat mechanic that's almost impossible to get any value out of. Quite the stark contrast to the previous Malfaust, don't you think? It's perfectly fine to get an average identity every once in a while, and if it wasn't for her stupid retreat mechanic, I would honestly take no issue with her. She can play into rupture just as well as anyone else, and honestly, what else can you really ask for in an identity? Just don't expect her retreat to do anything for you, because it won't. Anyway, to start the run off, we take these starter buffs and find these ego gifts on the first floor of Dregs of the Manor, before making it to the boss against the butlers. This is definitely the easiest of the 3 potential bosses because they have the capability of forcing corrosion, which in turn spells disaster for them. That, coupled with the fact that we have a skill with natural attack weight after the 3rd turn, gives us a fairly easy time here, as we can defeat all of the butlers even though we don't have enough skill slots to clash with everything. We take Rags and the manor-shaped music box for our reward, while also receiving Cigarette Holder as a bonus, before heading into Emotional Craving for the next floor. Here we buy Midwinter Nightmare, Lithograph, Bloody Gadget, and an extra skill 3 before making it to the boss against the Wayward Passenger. The Passenger isn't a particularly difficult fight. We can dodge everything on the first turn, and once he returns from his portals, we can instantly stagger both of his arms thanks to him having a gluttony weakness. Not much else to really say, we just have a really good matchup into him.
우와, 저건 어떻게 하는 걸까요? 역시 홍원 바깥은
시간 끌 것 없이 시도는 좋았어요. 차포잡이라 예상한 것보다 움직임이 시도는 좋았어요. 적에게 치명상을 입혔군요. 시간 끌 것 없이 저는 언제나 옳은 말만 한답니다. 모조리 지워버리죠. 불끈을 지원했군. 이런 시도는 좋았어요.
대성공이야.
놀라운 한 방이네요.
가론 신나. 노래 부를까?
방금 전에는 굉장했다고. 시간 끌 것 없이 모조리 지워버리죠. 거스라기.
다들
무상한 목숨.
첫 여정을 시작했을 때보다 정말 강해지셨네요.
불끈을 지원했군.
아, 여기선 이런 공격이 잘 먹히는군요.
와, 엄청난 공격이었어. 기념할 만한걸?
저분은 어디 아프신
시간 끌 것
걸까요?
없이
아까랑 다르게 기운이 없어
모조리
보여요.
지워버리죠. 시도는 좋았어요.
We take the Golden Urn and Oracle for our reward before heading to Full Stop by a Bullet for the next floor. Here we use over a year's supply of luck, finding not 1 but 2 different tier 4 ego gifts before the shop. We also find Gear Shrapnel and buy Nebulizer before making it to the boss against the Church of Gears. Even if we didn't spend all of our luck on getting Clear Mirror Calm Water incredibly early, this fight still wouldn't have been much of an issue. It does have the requirement of needing enough ego resources to fuel numerous egos, as the only way to ever actually beat it is by ego spamming. You do not have enough skill slots to clash with everything until around turn 8 or so, and as such, up until that point you have to rely on egos to stagger the gears, or else they won't hesitate in annihilating you. Fortunately, because we do have a skill with natural attack weight, we don't have to rely on egos as much as a normal identity would, as every one of our skill 3s we use effectively counts as 2 skills. On top of that, we also have plenty of ego resources, so this fight never even had the opportunity to pose a threat to us in the first place.
시간 끌 것 없이 모조리 지워버리죠. 무상한 목숨. 불끈을 지워낼 뿐. 무상한 목숨. 불끈을 지워낼 뿐. 무상한 목숨. 불끈을 지워낼 뿐.
그래,
무상한 목숨.
그렇게 시원하게 처리하니 보는 맛이 나는군.
불끈을 지워낼 뿐.
일 처리는 빠르게 하는 편이
이런.
덜 답답한 법이지.
아무튼 놀라운 한방이네요. 개체에게 일격을 가하는데 성공했습니다. 시간 끌 것 없이 모조리 지워버리죠. 무상한 목숨. 불끈을 지워낼 뿐. 적에게 치명상을 입혔군요. 최근은 좋았어요. 관리자님은 당신이 생각하는 것보다 좋았어요. 대단한 능력을 갖추고 있다고 제가 늘 말씀드렸죠. 허술하게. 최근은 언제나 옳은 말만 한답니다.
총원, 조명이 전멸하는 저곳으로 바로 모든 것을 쳐부술 거다.
차포잡이라. 예상한 것보다 움직임이 더 좋구나. 시간 끌 것 없이 모조리 지워버리죠. 최근은 좋았어요. 무상한 목숨. 불끈을 지워낸 것.
방금 어떻게 하신 거죠? 깜짝 놀랐어요.
다들
무상한 목숨.
첫 여정을 시작했을 때보다 정말 강해지셨네요.
불끈을
내일
지워낸
보아하는데도
검을
지금
휘두를 줄 아는 자는 많다.
감회가 새로워요.
그 검에 길이 있는지가 중요할 뿐.
마음에 들면 들었다. 솔직히 말해라 자로요. 보기 드문 용장에게 칭찬을 아낄 이유가 뭐 있는지. 시간 끌 것 없이 모조리 지워버리죠.
개체들의 체력이 많이 깎여 나갔어. 괴로워하는 게 느껴지지 않아? 이 기세로
지금은
계속
좋았어요.
나아가 보자.
무상한 목숨. 불끈을 지워낸 뿐.
저 수감자는 기억해 두겠습니다, 단테. 면담에서 취하할 만한 것이 있을 때 언급하라는 것도
불끈을 지워낸 뿐.
상부의 지시인지라.
무상한 목숨. 불끈을 지워낸 뿐. 훌륭한 제압 성과를 낸 직원이군. 최고는 좋았어요. 효율적인 결과를 위해서 이쯤에서 관리자님이 칭찬의 말을 건네줘도 좋을 것 같네요. 물론 진심까지 담길 필요는 없습니다. 시간 끌 것 없이 최고는 좋았어요. 최고는 좋았어요. 무상한 목숨. 불끈을 지워낸 뿐.
We take the equalizer and portable battery socket for our reward before heading into Poise Breathing for the next floor. Here we buy the Broken Revolver, Pendant of Nostalgia, Barbed Lasso, and Devil's Share, while also fusing the Book of Vengeance before making it to the boss against the Wayward Trio. For pretty much every single evade identity in the game, this fight is not hard in the slightest. However, because Ishmael is incapable of using her evade beyond the third turn without instantly losing the fight because of her retreat, it does add a little more nuance to this fight. The only reason it really matters is because Ahab hides behind Queequeg during turns 3 to 4, and as you cannot use your evade on the 4th turn, Ahab gets to attack you completely unopposed. Of course, you can easily stagger Queequeg on the 3rd turn to cancel this by breaking her shield, but she will hit you with a nasty counter in return, and because we're fatal to both Pierce and Sloth damage, it is very likely that it will end up staggering us. Fortunately, or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, I end up getting staggered early by a random missed evade, and because of that and the fact that I can't dodge anything after the 3rd turn, I decide that the best way to play this fight is to actually kill Starbuck on the 3rd turn, not only so he can't attack on the 4th, but so that I get a substantial amount of healing from all the various healing effects we have. That healing allows us to then do the exact same thing the next turn to Queequeg and be able to tank all of Ahab's attacks without getting staggered a second time. After dealing with her crew, Ahab doesn't last much longer because honestly without them she's nothing.
무상은 목숨. 불끈한 지원.
단탱님은 매번 기발한 발상을 떠올리시네요.
거슬하게. 최고는 좋았어요. 아무튼 놀라운 한 방이네요.
총체적 난국이에요. 머릿속에서
시간 끌 것 없이
경보가 울리는 것 같아.
모조리 지워버려. 무상한 목숨. 불끈한 지원을. 거슬하게. 차포잡이라. 예상한 것보다 움직임이 더 좋구나. 무상한 목숨.
방금 어떻게 하신 거죠? 깜짝 놀랐어요.
불끈한 지원을.
다들 첫 여정을 시작했을 때보다 정말 강해지셨네요.
적에게 치명상을
매일
입혔군요.
보아하는데도
시간 관리자님은 당신이 생각하는
감회가
것보다
새로워.
대단한 능력을 갖추고 있다고. 제가 늘 말씀드렸죠. 저는 언제나 옳은 말만 한답니다. 불끈한 지원을.
와, 엄청난 공격이었어. 기념할 만한 걸.
거슬하게. 무상한 목숨. 불끈한 지원의 뻔. 효과적이네요. 이 방식을 기억하는 게 좋겠어요.
We take Imposed Weight and 4-Relief Clover for our reward before heading to LCB regular checkup for the next floor. Here we buy Standard Duty Battery and Smoking Gunpowder before making it to the boss against Hoenheim. Hoenheim is a very interesting fight because even this early on you kind of need a reliable source of healing in order to be able to beat him. His gimmick is that every time you attack him, you deal damage back to yourself, and while it can't stagger you, he also has unbreakable coins which if you can't evade, will end up doing it for you. Thankfully, Ishmael does have a reliable source of healing. Yep, that's right. In case it wasn't obvious with the ego gifts we've collected up until this point, we're doing the wing beat strategy again. If you don't know, the wing beat strategy revolves around trying to increase the odds of wing beat rolling heads by using the support passives of both Ring Yi Song and Butler Faust. Both of them require you to hit a target with the status effects of Bleed and Sinking in order to restore 12 sanity for the first 2 hits. All you really need are the ego gifts of Red Sangosipium and Midwinter Nightmare, and you effectively guarantee that Wingbeat will reuse all of its coins. It is easily my favorite strategy in this entire game, and I always try to use it whenever I can.
총체적 난국이에요.
시간 끌 것 없이 모조리 지워버리죠. 그래요. 그렇게 가만히 있어요. 상처난 고기는
개체들의 체력이 많이 깎여 나갔어. 괴로워하는 게 느껴지지
최고는
않아?
좋았어요.
이 기세로 계속 나아가 보자.
We take the spiked combat boots and pinpoint logic circuit for our reward before heading into Nocturnal Sweeping for the next floor. Here we find Phantom Pain and buy Emerald Elytra as well as the Ragged Umbrella while also fusing Crushed Memory before making it to the boss against the Sweepers. Despite the fact that I start this fight incredibly slow and get staggered instantly without doing anything on the first turn, the Manor-shaped music box bails us out like always, allowing for us to decimate the Sweepers the next turn with Blind Obsession. We only need to use the ego for the first couple of turns though, as once our skill 3 gains its attack weight, it's all we really need anymore in order to kill every Sweeper in one shot.
시간 끌 것 없이 모조리 지워버리죠.
총원, 조명이 전멸하는 저곳으로 바로 모든 것을 쳐부술 거다.
방금 어떻게 하신 거죠?
시간 끌 것 없이 모조리 지워버리죠.
총원, 조명이 전멸하는 저곳으로 바로 모든 것을 쳐부술 거다.
적에게 치명상을 입혔군요. 관리자님은 당신이 생각하는 것보다 대단한 능력을 갖추고 있다고. 제가 늘 말씀드렸죠. 저는 언제나 옳은 말만 한답니다. 시간 끌 것 없이 모조리 지워버리죠. 무상한 목숨. 불끈 지원해.
일격에 저렇게나?
무상한 목숨. 불끈 지원해.
와, 엄청난 공격이었어. 기념할 만한걸?
불끈 지원해.
오, 아 이런. 아무튼
시간 끌 것
놀라운
없이
한방이네요.
모조리 지워버리죠. 무상한 목숨. 불끈 지원해.
개체들의 체력이 많이 깎여나갔어. 괴로워하는 게 느껴지지 않아? 이 기세로 계속
지금은
나아가보자.
그래. 그렇게 시원하게
시간은
처리하니
좋았어요.
보는 맛이 나는군. 일 처리는 빠르게 하는 편이 덜 답답한 법이지.
여러분들 기분이 좋아 보이시네요.
시간 끌 것 없이 모조리 지워버리죠. 무상한 목숨. 불끈 지원해.
다들 첫 여정을 시작했을 때보다 정말 강해지셨네요. 매일
지금은 좋았어요.
보아하는데도
자, 개체에게 큰 칼을 준 것 같아.
감회가 새로워요.
기획팀의 직원다운 완벽한 공격이었어.
지금은 좋았어요.
조금만 더 힘내자.
시간
이제
끌 것
정말
없이
개체의 제압까지 얼마 남지 않았어.
모조리 지워버리죠. 허술하게. 시간은 좋았어요. 시간은 좋았어요.
차포잡이라. 예상한 것보다 움직임이 더 좋구나.
시간은 좋았어요.
We take Death Seeker and Strange Glyph inscriptions for our reward, while also receiving the Shadow Bamboo Hat as a bonus before heading into the Infinite Procession for the next floor. Here we fuse the Dueling Manual Book 3 and Lunar Memory before making it to the boss against the Bloodfe Trio. I really did spend all of my luck for this run getting those 2 tier 4 ego gifts on the 3rd floor, because this is like the 3rd boss in a row where I get instantly staggered due to bad luck. It's not nearly as egregious as the others though, as Dulcinea is capable of outrolling our evade, at least on the first turn. Ishmael doesn't take too kindly to this though, and proceeds to take out her frustration on the barber, who is there 1 second and the next gone. I attempt to replicate this on the other 2 blood fiends, but apparently they don't taste as good as the barber because Ishmael outright refuses to eat them. Anyway, this fight isn't hard at all. Wingbeat just makes it faster, or at least it would have if it didn't fail 2 out of 3 times.
아, 이,
고귀하게.
아무튼
고귀하게.
놀라운 한방이네요.
마땅한 벌, 마땅한 벌을.
일촉즉발.
시간 끌 것 없이 모조리 지워버리죠. 그래요. 그렇게 가만히 있어요. 상처난 고기는 맛없으니까.
옳다.
이토록 풍요로웠어.
정보팀에서 준 자료와는 차이가 있지만
시간 끌 것 없이 모조리 지워버리죠. 그래요. 그렇게 가만히 있어요. 상처난 고기는 맛없으니까.
방금 공격은 좋았어.
벌을.
이대로만 계속해보면 좋을 텐데.
불끈에 지원해.
아, 여기선 이런 공격이 잘 먹히는군요.
무상한 목숨. 불끈에 지원해. 효율적인 대처로 개체를 꿰뚫었습니다. 참고로 시간 끌 것 없이 모조리 지워버리죠. 무상한 목숨. 불끈
지원했고.
그간의 전투 경험이 쓸모가 없진 않았군요.
지금은 좋았어요.
적합한 조치였습니다.
이 목마름에서
We take Finnefugality and Renewed Merch for our reward before heading into the Heartbreaking for the next floor. Here we buy Late Bloomer's Tattoo and Greycoat while also fusing Sundered Memory before making it to the boss against Not Heathcliffe. This fight can be entirely summed up with a single word: Wingbeat. I love this ego so much, man. I genuinely believe that it is the best designed ego in the entire game. Instead of it just being a high-clashing big attack weight skill, it is something you need to fully commit to in order to get it to work properly. Every other ego in the game is pretty much purely supportive. They are trying to support specific status effects, whereas Wingbeat becomes what you are trying to support. I wish there were more egos as centralizing as Wingbeat. Not ones that support teams, but ones that the teams are built to support. Anyway, I'm getting a little off topic here. I could talk for hours about how amazing Wingbeat is, but yeah, Heathcliff doesn't stand a chance against it.
판도는 유리하나 교만하면 뒤집어지는 법.
그래서 어쩌라는 거지?
시간 끌 것 없이
그걸 꼭 말로 해야 하나?
모조리 지워버리죠.
그래요. 그렇게 가만히 있어요. 상처는 먹기는 맛없으니까.
아, 여기선 이런 공격이 잘 먹히는군요.
지금은 좋았어요.
We take the Refraction Glass Pod and Renewed Merch for our reward before heading to Inert Sloth for the next floor. Here we buy Eclipse of Scarlet Moths and fuse the Fragment of Allurement before making it to the boss against the Time Ripper. As much as I'd love to say Wingbeat takes another victim and rips him to shreds, he's unfortunately one of the few fights where it doesn't really work. The reason why is because of the Redsting Gossipium ego gift. It only applies bleed at the start of a wave, and the Time Ripper's second phase transition does not count as such. As a result, his second phase entirely lacks any bleed, and we lose a lot of sanity healing from Ringy's song as a result, to the point where Wingbeat becomes incredibly unreliable and it's not really worth using. Even without it though, this fight is any harder, as we can very easily clash with the Time Ripper, and by having extra attack weight, we also effectively get double damage into him for a nice easy win.
입에서 갑자기 쓴맛이. 시간 끌 것 없이 모조리 지워버리죠.
대책이 큰 피해를 준 것 같아. 교육부의 직원다운 완벽한 공격이었어.
불끈 지원해.
와, 엄청난 공격이었어. 기념할 만한걸?
무슨 술술해.
틈이 생겼군. 내올 건가?
시간 끌 것 없이 모조리 지워버리죠. 무상한 목숨. 불끈 지원해.
개체들의 체력이 많이 깎여 나갔어. 괴로워하는 게 느껴지지 않아? 이 기세로 계속 나아가보자.
적에게 치명상을 입혔군요. 관리자님은 당신이 생각하는 것보다 대단한 능력을 갖추고 있다고 제가 늘 말씀드렸죠. 저는 언제나
단장님,
옳은 말만 한답니다.
굉장히 중요한 걸 잃으셨어요.
지면이 흔들거려요. 시간 끌 것 없이 모조리 지워버리죠. 무상한 목숨. 불끈 지원해.
그래, 그렇게
지금은
시원하게
좋았어요.
처리하니 보는 맛이 나는군. 일 처리는 빠르게 하는 편이.
We take Grand Welcome and the Rusty Commemorative Coin for our reward before heading into Tyrannical Pride for the final floor. Here we buy Temporal Brittle before making it to the boss against Ahab.
때가 왔다, 선원들이여. 자, 너를 깎아내라.
Yeah, so this fight is probably the single easiest fight in the entire mirror dungeon if you have Eclipse of Scarlet Moths, because I'm like 90% positive that it's actually bugged. Every single time I have that ego gift in this fight, Ahab starts her second and third phases staggered. And even with the amount of ridiculous damage we deal, I'm fairly certain she's supposed to have more health than what the moth can deal to her. There's definitely something wrong with her phase transition, like she's not getting enough health to compensate for the mirror dungeon buffs or something, but that's just a guess. Anyway, the Ahab fight is completely free because it's broken.
방금 어떻게 하신 거죠? 깜짝 놀랐어요. 적에게 치명상을 입혔군요. 관리자님은 당신이 생각하는 것보다 대단한 능력을 갖추고 있다고 제가 늘 말씀드렸죠. 저는 언제나 옳은 말만 한답니다.
시간 끌 것 없이 모조리 지워버리죠. 불끈 지원해.
완벽한 한방. 시원한걸?
불끈 지원해.
칼날이 잘 드네요. 아마 그 공격이 약점이었겠죠?
땅이 떨리고 있어. 가름도 흔들흔들.
시간 끌 것 없이 모조리 지워버리죠.
그래요. 그렇게 가만히 있어요.
상처는 거기는 맛없으니까.
제압 개체에게 큰 피해를 준 것 같아.
이렇게 쉽게 통과하리라곤 상상도 못했는데. 세가들에게 은자를 풀어야겠어요. 이런 경사스러운 날에는 조금 풀어줘도 괜찮겠죠.
And that's how I beat 10 floors of Mirror Dungeon 5 hard using only Gia Ishmael. I've already ranted enough about how mediocre this identity is at the start of the video, so I'll spare you all a repeat for the time being. Even though she is a very underwhelming identity who has more flaws than I can count on one hand, she is at the very least a usable one with a niche against fighting multiple enemies. Anyway, that's it from me. Like and subscribe for more videos like this one. Goodbye.